I just finished harvesting our garlic for the year. We have an amazing crop. So I decided let's talk about growing garlic. Garlic is one of my favorite things to grow in the garden, not just because it's delicious, but it is. I mean, I'm pretty sure that garlic makes everything better. I also love growing it just because it's super low maintenance, easy to manage, inexpensive, easy to store. It's just like one of the best crops to grow, in my opinion. If you want to grow garlic, the first thing you really need to decide is what type you want to grow. And I don't mean specifically variety. There are two different types of garlic. There is what's called soft neck and hard neck. And the major difference between these two, in my experience, is that soft neck garlic is going to store for a longer period of time in a root cellar or just dry storage situation, whereas hard neck garlic doesn't store as long. Now, I have experimented with this and I have had hard neck garlic that's stored for until the next season. So I'm not sure that that should be the sole deciding factor when deciding which one you're going to grow. The other thing that I've noticed is that hardneck garlic gets much, much bigger heads, like so much bigger, which is a big plus for me. The other thing that people like about softneck garlic is that, like the name says, the stems, once they dry, are softer. So it's easier to put a garlic braid together if you like that look. Kind of nice to store. But it is possible to braid or to kind of faux braid hardneck garlic for a similar look. I used to grow a little bit of both just for the sake of diversity, but at this point, I want the biggest heads possible. I grow all hardneck just so that I can kind of have a little bit more consistency with larger size heads. Okay, once you decide hardneck or softneck, which you're going to plant, the other thing to know ahead of time is that garlic needs to be planted in the fall. Now, I have experimented with this. I have planted garlic in the spring. I have even planted garlic in the fall and then transplanted it in the spring. Both times I still had success growing them, but they definitely weren't as big as anytime that I've planted it in the fall and then kept it in the same spot. Something about the way that the garlic root system is establishing, it is a cooler weather crop. So getting started first thing in the spring by having established roots is important in order for it to have enough time to grow to the size it needs to be or could potentially be at harvest time. I plant my garlic pretty densely. I think the little dibbler tool that I have, the holes are like 5 inches apart or so. You want to make sure that you're planting them pointy side up. And then all I do is just cover them with a deep layer of mulch, whether it is straw or hay or grass clippings, whatever I have on hand. You need to plant them before the ground really starts to freeze in the wintertime. Usually, our first frost in Michigan here, zone 5, is the end of September, but the ground doesn't really freeze until December at the earliest. So, my goal is usually to get them in long enough after our first frost that they aren't going to start sprouting before hard winter sets in, but soon enough that I don't have to chip through the ground to actually get them planted. So early November-ish typically is when I will put them in. If they do start to sprout, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to ruin them. And a lot of times, if you have that deep layer of mulch on top of them, they're not going to get that far out unless you're planting them really early. So come springtime, I will pull the mulch off of my garlic and I like to dress it with some fresh compost. And this does two things. Number one, it helps to just kind of bury the garlic a little bit deeper because a lot of time the dirt in the beds will settle and you'll have cloves that are popping out and you want them to be completely underneath the soil. So I do a big fresh coat of compost just to kind of cover them deeper. This also adds some more nutrients because garlic likes to have really fresh, rich soil. And then lastly, this compost will act as a mulch to keep the weeds from coming up. I will put actual dried mulch back onto my garlic beds because garlic likes to stay moist and it does not like to have competition. And because I plant them so densely, I need to make sure that those beds stay weeded, just like my onion beds. So I mulch them very, very heavily with grass clippings. Really, between the time the garlic starts poking up and the time that I'm actually able to start mowing the lawn for the year is a month or so. And I'll have to hand weed for a little bit of time. But once that grass clippings are starting to come in and be available, they always go to the garlic and the onion beds first before they go anywhere else in my garden. Once the grass clippings are on a really thick layer, that's pretty much all that I do to them until harvest time. I might add one more round of grass clippings in spots that weren't quite as thick here or there, and I might pull a weed from time to time. But as long as that bed is getting plenty of water, either by hand watering or rain, then it is going to do beautifully. I lied. There is one other thing I do to my garlic before harvest time, and this is only necessary for hardneck varieties. You have to harvest what's called the scapes. The scapes are a little kind of like swirly doodle, that is the official name, that grows out of the top, and at the end, there is a seed pod that the garlic is putting out to try to reproduce itself. If it is going to continue to have the scape, it's putting a lot of energy to that seed pod. But if you break it off, it's going to put the energy back to the bulb that it's growing in the ground. So you want to break those off and you can use them for your meals. I like scapes. I wouldn't say that I'm like totally, my world is rocked by them. But if you're going to try to utilize things versus have it just being waste, then you find a way to use them. Basically, imagine kind of a more dense garlic tinged green bean, is what the texture is like. You can saute them, you can puree them and make pesto, you can dehydrate them and just blend up as like a garlicky powder. The flavor isn't as strong as the actual clove, but it's definitely there. So do with that what you will. We typically harvest our garlic in early July, and you'll know that your garlic is ready to harvest when the bottom 2 or 3 leaves have started to turn yellow or brown and dry up. You can pull the garlic early and use it as a green garlic, which is just kind of a softer, it's not going to be a dried skin, but it's very, very strong flavored and very, very good still. If I can, I like to harvest my garlic after it's been a little bit dry because it's just easier to clean as I'm pulling them out. Shaking all of the dirt off is much easier when it's dry. However, this year we had such crazy rainfall in July after having an extremely drought like May and June that I ended up pulling my garlic a little bit early and they were wet simply because I was kind of worried about them rotting in the ground underneath all of that mulch. So they're not the cleanest looking while they are curing, but I'll be able to clean those up after they've dried off and they'll be totally fine going into storage without much dirt left on them. The best way to harvest your garlic without having too many of the stems break off of the heads and then having to dig the heads out is to reach down as deep as you can to the bottom of the stem. Gradually kind of wiggle it and then turn it to the side and pull it out kind of at an angle. You still will get some that will break off from time to time, but a little bit less likely. Once you have pulled your garlic, do not wash it. Brush off as much of the dirt as you can, and then find a spot that is out of direct sunlight and plenty of airflow for them to dry. I have done this on my porch. I have done it in the barn. This year I'm using a little overhang we have just outside of the garage. And you can hang it up in bundles, of 10 or so, or you can just lay it all out on a, you know, old chicken coop door, which is what I'm using. It's some chicken wire. Anything that's going to allow them to get some airflow so that they can dry thoroughly. Typically, this takes 2 or 3 weeks, depending on your weather conditions. And then at that point, you can start to kind of clean them up and get ready for storage. We primarily store our garlic in the root cellar just as is, but some people like to just process it all as they're going to use it right away. So they can blend it up and make little ice cubes of garlic, keep it in the freezer, which is super handy to have. But depending on what other preservations I have going on, I don't always have time to do that, even though I do like the convenience of having it just kind of grab and use. To clean them off for root cellar storage, you want to remove kind of that outer layer of the dried papery skin, which gets all of the dirt off, and then you can trim both the neck of the stem and the roots as kind of tightly as you can to the cloves. If you want to braid your garlic, you will leave the stem on completely. I saw a video the other day where some guy was using like a metal wire, like just a fencing wire, and he left the necks of the garlic about this long, and he was basically just threading them on. So he kind of staggered them though as he was threading them on so that it looked like a really thick braid. And it would be so much easier than actually braiding it, and you could probably fit more per mass clump, whatever you want to call it. So I might try that this year. Usually I will have like 1 or 2 braids just for something fun to hang up. Otherwise, the rest of mine just go into whatever crate or basket that I have available. Now, the best thing about garlic is that once you buy your first initial cloves to plant, you never have to buy seed again. I will pick my biggest and best cloves of the year, and I will save those for seed for the next fall. This year, I have some monsters. I haven't weighed them, but I am really, really excited with how this crop did. And that's basically it. Then you just repeat the cycle all over again. I hope that this was helpful. If there's anything I missed or any questions you have, feel free to leave a comment below. And now I really want to go make something because this is sounding delicious. I'll talk to you guys later. Hey, your breathing is loud. Go.